What it seems is through blockading or the antagonism of the adenosine receptors, we also sort of induce cell apoptosis in tumors basically. What's going on, guys? It's Jacob from Sunday Lifters. Welcome back to the channel. Today what we are going to be talking about is caffeine and coffee, and sort of going over the potential benefits mainly of having these in the correct dosages. It's like anything, I would say, like, the dosage decides. I'm definitely putting that on a fucking t-shirt at some point. But it does. The dosage decides whether you usually get a benefit from something, or you start to experience side effects, or you're more exposed to the side effect profile of that drug. Your tolerance, your genetics, all of these things play a role. But ultimately, if you can follow a general dosage guideline, it tends to be that we can usually get a positive health outcome from most things, to be honest. We'll say sort of at the start of this video, it seems that coffee in particular has quite a lot of health, sort of positive health outcomes, as opposed to just caffeine and anhydrous taken on its own. The reason being because coffees and teas tend to have a lot of phytochemicals within them that also sort of play a role in sort of different positive health outcomes we will get from caffeine, anhydrous, or coffee. Drinking coffee can be seen as a good or a bad thing depending on who you're speaking with. This is also very reflective in studies. There's some that sort of say, you know, too much coffee is bad, which is true. Again, it sort of just comes down to this dosage thing, but you'll find sort of arguments on both sides whether it's a good or a bad thing. But generally speaking, I feel like people do see it as a bad thing, and the reason being because of you know, sort of highly caffeinated energy drinks, sort of commercialized cafes like, well, I'm not going to say any names, but you know, you can guess. These things have sort of made it so in today's society people do drink too much caffeine, which I think has led some people to just stay away from it entirely because of all the negatives they hear about it, especially in the news. Whereas in actual fact, caffeine does have a huge sort of array of health benefits that people could be utilizing if they knew more about it and they just knew how much of it they should really be having. So as a general rule, wherever you look, it seems that 400 milligrams in a day is deemed safe in an adult human. It will always depend on your sort of, you know, your weight, your height, all of these things, like different things can come into play. But again, it's a general guideline. So what are the positive health outcomes that we will see from having 400 milligrams a day or less, and what are the potential negatives we might see from having more than that? We'll cover all of that in today's video, guys. But before we go any further, if you could just drop this a like, drop it a comment, subscribe if you're not already. It's mega appreciated. It helps the algorithms. But without further ado, let's talk coffee. Let's start off simple. So caffeine anhydrous supplementation, or coffee in general, has been sort of positively linked with weight loss over a period of time, more often than not desirable weight loss, of course, and just sort of keeping people at generally lower body fat percentages. And the reason being for that is probably because of the upregulation in the sympathetic nervous system, but also because drinking coffee will put a sort of temporary boost on your sort of your metabolism basically, and your sort of basal metabolic rate. So yeah, there's nothing more to be said on that really. Let's move on to the brain, and the thing with the brain is, again, we're going to talk about caffeine and anhydrous. If you were supplementing that and coffee together, both, and either one will have the same sort of effects on, you know, sort of neurological protection and neurotropic factors that we'll speak about. The main thing we will see from the supplementation of caffeine and anhydrous, or drinking coffee, in regard to neurological function is it seems to block the adenosine receptors in our brain. The adenosine hormone is responsible for making you more tired throughout the day. It builds up gradually up until the point where you go to sleep, where it sort of, you know, troughs, and then it builds up again over the next day, and so on. It continues this cycle. It's quite circadian in the way it acts. But yeah, what we tend to see is through the blockade of the adenosine receptor, there is a lot of health outcomes in terms of preventing neurodegenerative diseases, which we'll touch on more shortly. But also it seems to increase sort of brain-derived neurotropic factor, which is essentially, put simply, like growth hormone for the brain. It's going to sort of, you know, make us create more neurons and sort of pathways in the brain, make our sort of brain generally more neuroplastic, or increase its neuroplasticity. So linked directly to that is the, well, we'll touch on sort of cancer, and what it seems is through blockading or the antagonism of the adenosine receptors, we also sort of induce cell apoptosis in tumors basically. And what that means is it's more likely that the cells that make up the tumor will die. It prevents sort of DNA replication in the tumor, which is obviously a desirable outcome. Now, coffee specifically, not caffeine anhydrous as a substance on its own, but coffee specifically, probably because of the phytochemicals in the drink, seems to be really liver protective. We've seen sort of over long-term studies, it has really desirable health outcomes in terms of the liver. And again, specifically, it seems that people have less events or less likely development of liver cancers. So touching more on the neuroprotective element of caffeine or coffee, it seems that sort of regular consumption of these things basically stops the buildup of beta alanine plaques in the brain, which again are sort of linked directly with the development of Alzheimer's in later life. And also what we see is there's this thing, sort of these toxins called MTPT, which are directly linked with the development of Parkinson's disease. It's no sort of surprise that because we see less of these MTPT toxins in sort of caffeine consumers or coffee drinkers, the sort of rates of development of Parkinson's in these sorts of people is much lower than the general population. So finally, let's touch on sort of cardiovascular health and caffeine and coffee's relationship with cardiovascular health. I'll start by saying caffeine anhydrous taken on its own as a substance has sort of no relationship with desirable health outcomes within the cardiovascular system. So essentially, coffee is the thing we're going to be focusing on because caffeine anhydrous doesn't seem to have any positive health outcome. So I just want to make that clear here. This would indicate that the sort of cardiovascular benefits we get are actually from the phytochemicals in coffee as opposed to the actual substance of caffeine itself. The relationship coffee has with our cardiovascular health is very, again, dependent on the quality of the coffee, sort of how it's consumed and how much of it is consumed. So first off, it goes without saying that drinking a black coffee of about, I don't know, 150 milligrams in the drink with no milk, no sugar, no sweeteners is the most optimal way to have it, without doubt. I'm not going to say that that's what you need to do. Having a bit of sweetener in there, having a bit of milk in there is not going to, sort of negate the effects, I'll say. All I will say is that adding milk in, it's like when you add fat to anything that you consume, it means that it takes longer for your body to absorb the nutrients or the sort of substance you've put in. For the best outcomes in regard to cardiovascular health, people would be drinking 2 to 3 cups of coffee a day and not exceeding 400 milligrams of caffeine anhydrous in the day. Drinking 2 to 3 again shows sort of positive outcomes in terms of longevity, less instances of cardiovascular disease and complications, whereas inversely, having 6 to 7 cups a day has the sort of opposite effect. It puts you at more risk of cardiovascular disease and complications. So again, it really is sort of all down to the dosage, guys. The dosage decides. A little bit of side info just to put it out there. It has been shown you can have up to 250 milligrams in one sitting or 1 cup of coffee without any adverse effects. I'm not going to recommend you do that. I mean, some people have fucking pre-workouts with 350 milligrams of caffeine anhydrous in it in one sort of sitting. I'm not going to lie, I've done it before. It's just not necessarily what I would recommend. It's not the healthiest thing to do. But 250 milligrams in sort of one sitting seems to be safe. I would still recommend less personally. I'd say 150 in a cup of coffee is fine. So I'd say the general takeaway from this is don't sort of buy into the whole caffeine is the devil type thing. It's really not. It can be, it's just like anything else. You have too much of it, it is going to be bad. But if you use it to your advantage and you sort of know the dosages you're having, you're putting an aim on it, you can almost treat this, I always see it as like counting calories or measuring your macros out in your food when you're doing a diet. It's like if you can sort of know how much caffeine you're getting in one sitting from a coffee and have the 2 to 3 coffees throughout the day, every day, there is no negative or very minimal evidence to support that there's any negative health effects or outcomes of doing that. But there are a myriad of positive ones. So it's just another thing you can be implementing. The great thing about caffeine is it's a legal stimulant. It's like you don't have to feel guilty about doing this, especially if you're trying to use it sort of tactically throughout the day to sort of keep you going, from all the usual benefits of caffeine, like, you know, extra energy, sort of keeping you awake, staving off fatigue, mental focus, as well as all these health benefits we've spoke about in the video today. You know, I think people should be having caffeine. I think you should just be knowing exactly how much you're having every day. Be smart about how you're having your coffee. Do you know what I mean? So, and that's the other thing, guys, just to emphasize. I know I've been saying coffee, caffeine, coffee, caffeine. Coffee is the most desirable way to get your caffeine because the phytochemicals in the coffee are actually, you know, some of the benefits you get are specifically off those. So like I say, coffee is the most desirable way to get the caffeine, and it is what I would recommend. That's all I'm going to touch on today, guys. Really appreciate if you made it to the end of the video. Like I said earlier, if you could just drop it a like, comment, subscribe if you haven't already. It is mega appreciated. If you want to work with me, you can email me at sundaylifters@gmail.com for workout plans, meal plans, and online coaching. You can follow me on all my socials. It's Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, @SundayLifters, and I will see you back here again very soon. Cheers.